This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 37 of season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, September 16th, 1911, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the Graniteville section. The members of the A.R. Schote Hose Company held their regular meeting in Healy's Hall on Monday evening, with Captain J.A. Healy presiding. The meeting was well attended. Considerable business of a routine order was transacted, after which the members enjoyed a social hour. The experiment of oiling the streets was tried for the first time on Tuesday afternoon, where the portion of Main Street between Grieg's Corner and the Boston and Main Depot were given a covering of the oily mixture. A subscription paper has also been presented to the people along Broadway Street to see if they will contribute something toward defraying the expense of having Broadway Street oiled. Captain Sherman H. Fletcher of the Westford Board of Selectmen was down here on Tuesday and was deeply interested in the work. It is thought that the required sum will soon be subscribed and the work will be continued at once. Frank L. Furbush is now spending his vacation at his boyhood home at Farmington, Maine, and before he returns, he will make a visit to Rangeley Lakes, which are also in Maine. He will be absent 2 weeks. Mr. and Mrs. Edward Defoe and son Gerald, who have recently returned from a pleasure trip to Victoriaville, Canada, report a very pleasant time while away. Victoriaville is located in south-central Quebec. The next section is the Westford Center section. Fred A. Naylor of Ford's Village, who has been a regular attendant at the Congregational Church for the last 2 years, has not been coming alone since the reopening of church services after the vacation. In attendance with him is his young English bride. Her name was Helena Kilmister, of a few weeks. They were born in Boston on July 19, 1911, and Fred was also born in England in Silsden, Yorkshire. Mrs. Oscar Spaulding entertained the Thimble Club and a few other guests at camp, probably on Forge Pond, on Wednesday of this week. The guests were transferred to and from in Mr. Blaisdell's comfortable barge. Many were the contributing causes to make the event one of Mrs. Spaulding's pleasantest camp reunions. There were 18 guests present. At the Congregational Church on Sunday morning, it was Labor Sunday. Reverend David Wallace, in his sermon, gave an intelligent presentation of many phases of both sides of complicated labor problems, and what the attitude of the church is thereto. In the evening, John Adams Taylor presented 2 of Henry Van Dyke's poems, in which this well-known preacher, author, and teacher presented the spirit of labor most excellently. A large number came out to hear Mr. Taylor, and his sympathetic rendering of the author's thought was sincerely appreciated. Henry Jackson Van Dyke of Pennsylvania, mentioned here, born in 1852 and died in 1933, is perhaps best known for his Christmas stories, The Other Wise Men, published in 1896, and The First Christmas Tree, published a year later, and also for his lyrics of the popular hymn, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee, which was published in 1907 and sung to the tune of Beethoven's Ode to Joy. A daughter has recently been born to Mr. and Mrs. David Sherman. Her name was Lisle G. Sherman, L-I-S-L-E, born August 30th, 1911, in Lowell. Mrs. Edward Fisher and daughter Esther are at Swampscott for a week. The annual agricultural fair under the auspices of the Congregational Church will take place next Friday afternoon and evening. The Ladies' Missionary Society met at the parsonage on Wednesday afternoon and made plans for the season's work. On Friday afternoon of last week, the Clambake Club had its annual meeting and spread This is the sixth season these affairs have taken place. Mrs. John Feeney, Mrs. Edward Fisher, and Mrs. Alfred Hartford were the hostesses on Friday, and it was a great success in every way. The weatherman was not quite kind, but that did not deter the gathering from carrying out their plans. The scene was changed from John Feeney's apple orchard to the lower town hall. The long table presented a cheerful sight with its with its delicious menu and decorations of golden glow. There were about 20 in attendance. The Lowell Electric Light Company are making good progress setting poles and wiring for electric lights, and there is every prospect the town will be lighted by late fall. We're talking about street lights here. A large force of workmen are at work and have poles in place from Forge Village, part of the pumping station, at Pine Ridge to Westford Center. It was the 89th birthday anniversary of Mrs. Edwin Gould at the home of her son, George Gould, on Tuesday of this week. The event was made pleasant by the presence of invited guests who brought felicitous greetings. Also, Mrs. Gould was the recipient of some pretty gifts and some beautiful flowers. Refreshments were served by the hostess, Mrs. Arthur T. Blodgett. Mrs. Gould, whose longtime home was at North Westford, enjoys, aside from deafness, very comfortable health. Dr. and Mrs. Henry L. McCluskey and son Donald of Worcester were guests at Mr. and Mrs. A.S. Wright's on Wednesday of last week, coming in their auto. The day was their 12th wedding anniversary. Miss Lila C. Fisher returned recently from a delightful European vacation and went this week to resume her teaching in Boston. Miss Dora Hawkes of Melrose has been guest of her aunt, Mrs. Alfred Hartford, during this week. The programs for the Tadmont Club for the coming season have been distributed to the members this last week and present their usual attractive appearance in their pretty gray covers, and within, the outline of the winter is full of suggested possibilities for instructive entertainment. The special topic for study is South America, which follows nicely after last season's subject of Spanish North America. These afternoons will be interspersed with other interesting subjects. The first of these will be at the first meeting, Tuesday, October 10th, called quote, Home Afternoon, end quote, in charge of Miss Marion Sweet, S-W-E-A-T-T, assisted by Miss Winifred Burnham and Mrs. Cyril A. Blaney. Miss May Day returns this week for her senior year at Smith College. Miss Gertrude Hamlin, who was graduated from Miss Kimball School for Girls at Worcester in June, enters Wellesley College this week. Leon Hildreth resumed his studies at Lowell High School this week. Among our home young people going to other places to teach are Miss Ruth Tuttle to Winthrop, Miss Edith Wright to Ayer, Miss Edna Ferguson to Beverly, Miss Jenny Ferguson to Presque Isle, Maine, Mrs. Jenny Chandler, Julia Hall, and Lila Fisher to Boston, Miss Edith Bicknell to South Royalston, Miss Stella Hartford to Carlisle, and Archie Hartford to Norwood. A sad case of sickness is reported at Charles H. Bicknell's on the South Road. Mrs. Bicknell has boarding with her a family of 4 children named Winters. These children are wards of the state. Grace, aged 4, has infantile paralysis, but the physician in charge thinks her case hopeful of recovery. Not so hopeful is the case of an older brother, Morris Winters, aged 12, who is suffering with the dreadful tetanus or lockjaw. At this writing, his sufferings have not reached the acute stage that they will. The boy got a rusty nail into his foot, and when the physician first saw him, the early stages of tetanus were well developed. Mrs. J.G. Lester of Paterson, New Jersey, has been visiting Mrs. Ida Gould and Mrs. Jonathan Colburn this week. Superintendent of Schools Frank Hill will be at the Academy building on Tuesday afternoons from 2 to 4 o'clock, the same as last year, for conferences with parents and others on matters that may come up pertaining to the schoolwork. Seth Bannister enters Amherst Agricultural College, now UMass Amherst, at the beginning of the fall term, and Alistair McDougall goes to the same for his third year. The graduating class of the Academy this last season have plans as follows. Anna Sims is studying stenography and typewriting at Miss Hard's School in Lowell. Ruth Furbush has entered Lowell Normal School, now UMass Lowell. Seth Bannister goes to Amherst. Ruth Flagg goes to East Greenwich Academy in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, to especially study music. Joseph Leduc goes to Clark College, Worcester. John Feeney expects to go to Amherst for a special course later. Miss Ida Trask, Miss Addie Day, and Herbert McMaster are at home for the present. Will E. Wright, who has charge of the local teaming of produce to the Boston market, tried as an experiment an auto truck for a trip Tuesday night with a 2-ton capacity. It is hoped by many that this may lead the way to doing away with horsepower for the heaviest trucking. And I'm happy to report it did. Miss Grace Robinson and Miss Hilda Isles are studying at the Lowell Commercial College. Pearl Harmon, who has occupied Miss Mary Moran's house for the past 6 months, removed his goods to Chelmsford this week, Monday. William R. Carver has a force of 20 Italian workmen on the Brigham farm, where they will do some extensive work clearing land, etc., for extensive setting out of fruit trees, mostly apple. Quarters for the men have been built in one of the fields on the brow of Depot Hill. William Carver of Boston, who's mentioned here, bought the house at 63 Main Street from Donald Cameron in 1912. This is the house whose roof and upper story were destroyed by fire about 5 years ago, and it's currently undergoing repair and renovation by the This Old House PBS TV show. A recent real estate transfer is that of the Bean Place, which was 14 Depot Street, to Mrs. Cora E. Carver. 1 mile of the main street in the center, extending from the village side of George Haywood's to Drew's Corner, has received a coat of oil. This is in the nature of an experiment to allay the dust and preserve the roadbed. The preparation is a heavy oil containing 40% asphaltum, which works into the surface and is said to give excellent results in other towns where it has been tried. Abutters along the oiled section have contributed well toward the expense. Mrs. Leonard Wheeler entertained the Thimble Club on Wednesday of last week with full attendance and a merry time. A supper was served to the guests. The next paragraph was entitled Schools. Schools opened last week Monday with a large attendance. There are no changes in the teaching force at the center this year. Principal Dexter Cogshaw at the Academy, assisted by Mrs. Norris and Lawrence. Miss Ruth Fisher, principal at the Frost School, assisted by the Mrs. Grant, Burnham, and Crocker. Miss Raines, supervisor of music, and Mr. Brackett, the drawing instructor, the same as last year. Those in charge of transporting of scholars are Mr. Hunt from the west and Mr. Blaisdell from the south end and Mr. Merrill from the north end. And the electric car brings from the East Village, that is Brookside District. Mrs. Carter has taken Mrs. Lawrence, Morris, and Burnham to board, the same as last year, and Mrs. Grant and Crocker board at Mrs. J.E. Knight's. The next section is called the Grange section. The annual Neighbors' Night of the Grange took place last week Thursday evening under auspicious conditions. Members of Acton and Littleton were the invited guests, and each Grange brought a good delegation, and there were also representations from several other Granges. There were fully 150 in attendance. The visitors gave the entertainment, and the home grange the supper, according to time-honored custom. Littleton members presented a farce titled A Paper Match and a good miscellaneous program. The play A Paper Match, a farce in one act, was written and published by E.W. Burt in 1910, just the year before this was written. Acton members gave some excellent music, a ladies' quartet and a gentlemen's quartet, also solos. Among the speakers were worthy Master Richard Barrows of Littleton and past masters Tuttle and Peyton of Acton. Mrs. Joseph Knight and Mrs. Samuel Taylor were in charge of the supper and a good corps of assistants. The ladies' degree staff, in charge of Mrs. Snow, has organized and will begin rehearsals for the fall initiations. This staff is in charge of the entertainment at the next meeting, Thursday evening, September 21st, and are planning an attractive program. Next, we come to the About Town section, written by Samuel L. Taylor. The Board of Registrars will hold a meeting in the Town Hall on Wednesday evening, September 20th. All persons entitled to register for the caucus on September 26th will have an opportunity. Hiram Dane, who has arrived from California, will sell his farm and personal property at auction today. It has a large beach frontage on Longsot Pond. Seth Bannister, he of the familiar Bannister Corner, which is the junction of Lowell and Providence Roads, where the Bannister family lived, has entered Amherst Agricultural College. Felton, a junk dealer of Lowell, has bought the Vose farm on the Acton Road, and Stearns, the invalid who formerly lived there, has moved on to the West Place near Carlisle Station. Reverend L.L. Green of Chelmsford conducted the services at the Unitarian Church on Sunday in exchange with Reverend Benjamin Bailey. The next meeting of Westford Grange will be held on Thursday evening, September 21st. Mrs. F.L. Snow has charge of the lecturer's hour, which will be open meeting. The first reunion of Warm Weather and Frost for 1911 was held on Wednesday evening. It's a little humor by Mr. Taylor. The next section is entitled Clipping. The following was taken from a recent issue of the Boston Globe. This is a quote, the next few paragraphs. If you don't live in the 6th Councilor District, which is made up of the 1st, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Middlesex senatorial districts, you may not have heard of Councilor Herbert E. Fletcher on the Governor's Council, but if you do know him as a quiet, unobtrusive politician of the old school, he has little use for the newfangled ideas of party politics, which the uplift element insists on calling, quote, progressive, end quote. Ever since he began to vote, Councilor Fletcher has been deeply interested in politics. He is a native of Westford, where he lives, and has been selectman of his town, a member of both branches of the legislature, and is engaged in the granite business. He is one of the Republicans who is listed at headquarters, quote, will stand without hitching, end quote. He can boast of the only pompadour in the Executive Council. He is a thin, wiry, blond man and a tireless worker. It looked one time as if Mr. Fletcher's political career was ended. The Newton contingent in the district, a most important cog in the Republican will of that section, was trimming him. He was promised their support at the expiration of Cyril Jones' second term in the council, but Cyril, who was close to Congressman Weeks as the bark to a tree, hankered for a third term. Billy Garcelon and the others who pulled the strings out that way arranged it so that Cyril got what was denied Ulysses S. Grant and others of less account in the political arena, that is a third term. The following year, 1910, the Newton politicians kept their word and handed him the nomination on a silver platter. If they hadn't made good, the chances are that Councilor Fletcher would have started something. He had been watching them for a year, as the late George M. Stearns of Chicopee used to watch those whom he played cards with. Mrs. Stearns, the story goes, protested to Mr. Stearns about the tobacco juice stains on his white shirt front. He explained that they were undoubtedly caused by his expectorations while he was playing cards with his cronies. "Can't you turn your head when you want to spit?" demanded Mrs. Stearns. "Not with that crowd, my dear," was the old Democrat's answer. Councillor Fletcher will be re-elected this fall. He has no serious opposition. That's the end of the quote from the Boston Globe. The next section is the Forge Village section. Eugene Simpson of Boston has been spending his vacation in the home of Mrs. Elizabeth Splain. Sunday school opened last Sunday at St. Andrew's Mission and was in charge of Reverend A.L. Bumpus, who will have charge until Mr. Lowell of Groton School returns from his summer vacation. On Wednesday evening, September 30th, a parish meeting will be held in Recreation Hall. All who are interested in St. Andrew's Mission in any capacity are earnestly requested to be present. I should perhaps mention that the St. Andrew's Mission was a mission of St. Andrew's Church in Ayer, and the pastors at Ayer also covered, such as Reverend Bumpus mentioned here, also covered the mission in Forge Village. Ernest Castengary of Manchester, New Hampshire, was the weekend visitor at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Parrott of Beaver Brook Road. Mrs. Catherine Elliott of Bradford Street has recently purchased from W.H.P. Hardy a strip of land situated on Pleasant Street and Concord Road. Miss Mary C. Joyce of Lowell was the guest of Miss Christina Lowther last week. Miss May Lord, who is training to become a nurse at the South Framingham Hospital, visited at the home of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. David Lord, over Sunday. Miss Grace Lawrence and Miss Emma Plummer are visiting at Portland, Maine. A farewell dancing party was held by the young people who have been camping on the shores of Forge Pond in Abbott Hall last week Friday evening, which was very well attended. Music was furnished by Miss Sarah Precious piano and Harry Brown violin. The children's playground at Cameron Park was opened last week Thursday. Swings, seesaws, and merry-go-round have been placed in position, and a baseball diamond greatly adds to the sport. Abbott Worsted Company have kindly made the improvements in the park and put in position these amusements for the young people. I believe this was the park just to the left of the Cameron Senior Center, what is now the Cameron Senior Center. The ball field is still there. Miss Florence Strout and friends from Lowell spent the last of the week at Mr. Hardy's cottage at Forge Pond. A son was born on Tuesday, September 5th, to Mr. and Mrs. Edmund Hunt. He was named Herbert E. Hunt. Mrs. Hannah Collins of Haverhill is the guest at the home of her son, Miles Collins. Miss Bertha Collins has returned to Lowell Commercial College. Miss Mabel Sanborn has started on her second year in the high school at Ayer. William Davis and Albert Collins have resumed study at the Westford High School. I don't know why they say Westford High School. It was surely Westford Academy. Miss Alice Leahy of Ayer visited her aunt, Miss Letitia V. Ward, principal of Cameron School, on Thursday. Mrs. H.E. Randall is entertaining Dr. Harrison M. Bennett of Washington, D.C., and his brother, Abijah Bennett of Weowega, Wisconsin, who, with their brother, Alvin Bennett, and sisters, Mrs. Mary Drake and Mrs. Lucretia Reed, attended the Bennett reunion held at the home of their brother, John Bennett of Worcester, on Labor Day. And that's the news in Westford for the week ending September 16th, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Nick Woodbury of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at westfordmuseum.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.